Welcome to the first MSW Journal Club. You'll have to forgive me. I'm still working on the whole speaking in front of a large crowd, especially in front of a computer screen. I hope everyone's here for this. If you're not, then let us know. And today we're going to be talking about safer infant sleeping discussions. If you would like to please introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be fantastic. We are going to be talking about some different things throughout the session. If you'd like to, there are going to be some audience participation bits. So I'll actively encourage you to pop your hands up on Teams, and then I'll be able to unmute you as we go. If you do have any questions, there is a Q&A section as well, which we'll be getting to towards the end. So just to let you all know, before we start, the main section of this will be recorded, and the Q&A section at the end will be where we stop the recording, so that won't be recorded. So we'll make a little start. So just before we do, a little bit about myself. So I do recognise a lot of faces and names on the screen today, but for any of you who don't know me, my name's Rob. I'm a practice development midwife for Maternity Support Workers in Birmingham. So I started this role last January in 2023, and essentially started to try and look at different ways we could support MSWs, gaps in the training needs and everything like that. Obviously, we've got the framework, which really helps embed new areas for training, but I wanted to look at more specific areas that it doesn't touch on. And one of the things that historically MSWs haven't had access to is evidence-based literature and things like that. So we started doing an email where we have 4 PDFs a month, pieces of research in there, and I basically would give you a brief synopsis, a brief rundown of what the paper did, and then some analysis points to get the ball rolling, get you thinking about what sort of things we like to have a little look at. As we progress through that, we've just coming up towards a year with the Journal Club actually, but I released some feedback a while ago, and actually one of the things that people were saying were, wouldn't it be nice that if we had a group of people, MSWs, that want to engage with research, want to engage with evidence-based midwifery and maternity care, and actually we could get together and talk it through. And that's what this is. So we're going to try and run this every other month in collusion with mid-ears, which should be really, really exciting. I hope you all really enjoy it. There is a little bit of a feedback form at the end. I'd be really, really appreciative if you could feedback as honestly and as open as you can. The more feedback you get, the more we can tailor this to the needs of the population. I want to keep going with this. I'm very, very positive, and I'm very, very keen to get this rolling out every other month to try and help support our workforce. So the more you guys can give me, the more I can give you, and that'd be great. So moving on, I think I've just covered the next slide, and I think that covers very, very well our mission statement. It's about addressing needs of the MSW workforce. We obviously, historically, I would make the argument that MSWs are overlooked, not just in research, but in some training as well, hence the inclusion of the framework. But this is looking at trying to highlight areas that MSWs historically have wanted to get involved with, but have been a bit overlooked. We do talk about a bit about that in today's paper. So we're trying to do our best to try and help with that. So here we go. Let's have a little look. So moving on to today's topic. Oh, there we go. Is safer infant sleeping discussions. So obviously, something that we all do, both midwives and MSWs, talking about how to safely make sure to reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. A little bit of background on SIDS itself. So as you can see, nearly 1 in 4,000 babies have a current unexplained infant death within the UK. It normally happens within the first 6 months, about 89% for that. It happens in boys more than it does girls, but that discrepancy is starting to balance itself back out. It does tend to happen in like risk factors that are included are teenage pregnancies, socioeconomic status has a big big effect on that. And since its inclusion, can just very quick pop quiz. Anyone tell me when we really started to promote safe sleeping? If you pop your hand up real quick, anyone want to take a stab? Or you can put it in the chat. Nobody's feeling brave this morning, are they? That's okay. That's okay. It's 1991. So, and actually, we've had an over 80% decrease in sudden infant deaths since then. So it works. We know it works. And the good thing about this, when it was first introduced, was it's a really good example of a very simple public health message. I can't remember what they originally called it. It was something, it was about making sure babies were on their back, essentially. That was the big push. And it was something like back is safe, or I can't remember what they said, but essentially there was a big push, and it made everybody remember it, and that's how it was implemented. Oh bless. Back to sleep. That was it. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. That's great. Back to sleep. Yeah, and that was the key message, and actually it's stuck in people's minds. And I thought it's a really good starting subject. I really like the paper we've got to discuss today. I think it's a brilliant example of well, I'll show you what it's a brilliant example of in a minute. But I just think that it's a really good topic as well. It bridges a lot of gaps, and it's something that MSWs are doing on the daily. And actually, we need to, you know, if you're doing something on the daily, it pays to know a bit more about it and to be able to look at research about it and be able to say, actually, I recognise that and I can appraise it appropriately. Lovely. So, oh, I've gone backwards. That's not good. Great start. So, pop quiz. And this is the bit where I'll get you to raise your hands. Can anybody tell me one of the 6 basic pieces of advice for safer infant sleeping? Oh, Hannah, I can see you've got your hand up. Give me a sec. Let me see if I can unmute. Yeah. Go, Hannah. Can you hear us? Not to. We're going with the chat. Not to overlap. Yeah. So, avoiding baby overheating is absolutely right. Who was next? Sorry, I am not as au fait with Teams as I should be. Amanda, you care to come in with another one?
Feet to the foot of the bed.
Feet to the foot of the bed, lovely. That's what we like. I can see Gillian isn't. Oh, I think you've just stolen Gillian's by it. Going back to the chat, let's have another quick look. Clear cot, love it. Feet to the foot of the crib, lovely. No loose blankets, no bumpers with pillows. That leads in with the clear cot. Absolutely. So we did speak about one at the moment, about keeping baby on their back, keeping the cot nice and clear, using a nice firm, flat and waterproof mattress. Keep your baby smoke free, avoid the baby overheating like we said, and then sleeping with your baby in the same room as you for the first 6 months. So again, those are the main key points from the Lullaby Trust themselves. And I think actually it's what this paper looks at. So yeah, safer co-sleeping. I can see Hannah's just spoken about sofas. Absolutely. And that's one of the big changes in recent years, is going from not co-sleeping to that safer co-sleeping, and actually having that awareness and that being able to keep an eye on things. Fantastic. So this feeds nicely into the paper that we're going to look at today. So this is a paper from Mid-Ears themselves, our lovely sponsors. I thought we'd start off with one of theirs. And this paper looked at, it's titled Midwives' Experiences of Safer Infant Sleep Discussions at a Southwest London Hospital, a Work-Based Learning Project. Oh, and I can see that Heather's just put the paper in the chat so far. Just a quick show of hands. Has anyone read this prior to coming today? Did anyone get a chance to scan it or have a quick look over it? That's a no from Gillian. That's all right. Anyone? No? Okay, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. That's why I'm here. So yeah, not a problem, because I'm going to go through it now. So what did they do? So I really like this paper, and I think it's a really good starting point, because I think it's got a really nice structure to it. So the first thing that the 2 authors from this paper did was that they did a literature review. So essentially they identified an issue within their trust, and they then went to the paper, to the research and the literature, and went, right, what do we already know? What's being said about this right now? And they did a literature review, and they reviewed what people were saying. And so they then undertook a survey regarding that topic within their trust to address the need that they'd identified, to to observe more closely what was going on within their trust. They started it with an initial pilot of 3 participants, and then after that they found that they were happy with it. They tweaked it a tiny bit. I think the only thing they had to tweak it with was when they were asking the participants about their ethnicity, there was the only category missing was Indian other. But other than that, I think they pretty much kept it the same. After the full launch, they then sent it out to, I think it was 145 participants, and 58 was their return rate, which was about 40%, which, do you know what? That's a pretty good return. That's a very good return. A very common thing that we'll talk about over the course of these webinars is attrition. So a bit similar to this webinar, for example, the amount of people we have invited isn't always going to be the same as the amount of people that turns up. And that's absolutely fine. That's all part and parcel of the process. But I just think it's a really good thing to notice that actually they've got a 40% return rate, which is really, really good. They then looked at the survey results and broke them down into themes. So like a thematic analysis, that's a very common way within research to be able to group findings together and to be able to sort of highlight things in a very, not a broad way, but in a more concise and an easier to digest fashion. So what did they find? So these are the key themes that they found. So the first theme that they found was regarding the advice itself. So what this paper looked at specifically was, of the 6 pieces of basic advice that we just discussed, how many of them were hitting all 6 of those, and were they doing it at the appropriate times? So this paper describes the trust policy for this hospital about when they were supposed to be having these conversations. Off the top of my head, I know it was booking, I think it might have been 32, 34, and at every postnatal visit. That might be incorrect. As I said, I haven't got the paper just in front of me at the moment. But there was a few antenatally, and then in every postnatal visit, including obviously before they went home from hospital, if they gave birth in hospital. So actually what they were finding was not only are all these conversations happening when they should, but also those conversations, the content of that conversation wasn't hitting every recommendation as per the Lullaby Trust's safe sleeping recommendations. So actually that's one of their big issues. So that was so again, clear, nice and concise, keeps it together. So they then moved on to the second theme, which was communication. So communication, the 2 key themes under that were that there were language barriers in terms of non-English speaking or English as an additional language. We then moved on to information overload. So essentially they felt like they were giving too much information within those visits to very tired mums and dads and other partners, and that they felt like it wasn't being taken in, or they were giving them so much that it wasn't, they were throwing a lot and not all of it was sticking, essentially. Moving on to the third theme, this was a theme about equipment. So this was relating specifically to the equipment used within safer sleeping. So they were finding that there was a massive discrepancy in terms of socioeconomic status. So they felt that they felt bad about recommending pieces of equipment to ensure that safe sleeping for people who might not necessarily be able to afford it, or wouldn't have factored that in to their financial plans when having a baby. And then on the flip side of that, you also had the higher socioeconomic status groups that were buying everything under the sun that was advertised to them, because we all know that those companies love to target those fresh parents and any slight anxieties they might have. And actually they were buying all this stuff, but they didn't necessarily know the evidence base behind it. So somebody mentioned earlier about cot bumpers, a perfect example. And one of my personal bugbears is that something that we shouldn't be recommending, because again, it can overheat that baby, it traps that warm air in. And also if they roll over and they get it in their face, they can suffocate themselves. So something that, again, before I discharge anyone from the postnatal ward, I will always say, just out of interest, you haven't got any cot bumpers, have you? And that's how it comes in. And then the final thing, as a visual aid, again, something that I really like about this paper was, instead of just noticing what was wrong and asking people what wasn't going well, they actually asked for a solution, which is again, you might not see that in every paper, but I think this is a really, really good, it's a really good example of a proactive paper. Instead of going, this is what's wrong, oh, what are we going to do about it? They actually got all respondents and said, right, well, what's the answer? You're the ones on the shop floor, you're the ones having these conversations. How can we improve this? So those are the findings. And yeah, so show of hands, or if anyone would like to chime in, how familiar does that sound to everybody? Does that hit some buttons in your brain that go, yeah, that sounds about right? You can either pop it in the chat or pop your hand up. I can see a lot of thumbs up come in. That's what I like to see. Another one from Gillian there. Yeah, I think that's really, it's good to know. I think that's a very accurate picture. Again, from the experience I've had in postnatal care, I haven't done a lot of community-based care in my time, but I have done a lot of postnatal care, whether that's in a more intra-apartment setting, as I'm sending people home from the birth centre, or from a postnatal ward. I think those are very accurate findings. And again, they found, as part of this paper, they applied what they found to the literature review. So essentially the structure was introduction, a hypothesis, or what's the word I'm looking for? Basically a legitimate reasoning for why they were doing it, and showing actually this is what we're finding on a big scale. They then took it down to a small scale within their local trust, but then said, we found that language barriers was a key. If we look at the bigger picture, we know that ethnicity, socioeconomic status, etc., have a big impact with this, and they applied it to the big picture and sort of just provided that justification. So, and then, like I said, they then moved on to, well, what are we going to do about it? And I really like this paper. I think it's a really, really, like I said, proactive, and I'm going to be singing its praises all the way through, but it's just nice for me as a presenter to have something that I actually have a lot to say about. So moving on, so that's what they found. What did they do? So as I said, they made a plan, and what did they do about it? So this is the section sort of at the end. So they used this as a sorry, did somebody just have their hand up, or did I imagine that? Anybody want to put their hand back up if it was just up, or am I going blind?
I think it was just someone coming in.
Oh, perfect, lovely. There's a reason I wear these, you know. So what did they do? So they, as I said, they had this justification, they had their results from the study, and they used it as a basis for a QI project. So they sort of said, we know there's a big problem. We also recognize there's a smaller problem within our local area. So what can we do about it? And they used it as a basis for a QI project. So they identified a training need within their locality. They then, as I said, using the themes before, they said, what can we do about this? And the key thing they found was people said a visual aid would benefit massively within this topic. So in terms of bridging language barriers, in terms of bridging gaps within care provision, socioeconomic status, etc., a visual aid would massively help with this. Furthermore, again, they utilize this time to provide more resources. So the Lullaby Trust has a lot of online leaflets in varying languages, which was very, very helpful. One thing they did note is that, now I can't remember exactly which language it was, but there were some additional languages that didn't have a pictorial guide. So they didn't have the pictures with either a big tick of a baby at the bottom of the cot, no toys in the cot, etc., no cot bumpers, and a big cross showing baby with 3 million teddies around them. So again, that shows a bit of a discrepancy in terms of the available resources, and they do identify that within the paper. They also looked at beginning a risk assessment tool, where essentially they could almost predict people that, so again, lower socioeconomic status, teenagers, English as an additional language, etc., and they could actually flag that up within their documenting system. So I believe this trust used Badgernet, which is what we use in Birmingham. But for anyone else, very similar things like, I think like you've got K2 and things like that. So essentially they were looking at factoring that in to the program itself. And the good thing about how programs such as Badgernet works is that they don't tend to do things specifically for one place. If they change it for one trust in the UK, they have to change it for everybody. So actually this would have national implications in a very, very short amount of time. The final thing they found, again, was financial factors, as is always the case in research. You will find that a lot of papers that we look at over the course of this will say, ideally, we'd like to do X, Y, and Z. However, due to financial constraints, whether that's NHS financial constraints on a big picture or on a smaller picture within the trust or even within the budget of the department, they might say, well, we can only do this. And I think that's very important as well. It shows about the quality of the research that you're looking at. And it gives a very good, if they're a bit idealistic, it tends to detract from the quality of the evidence that you're looking at, because we all can say what we'd love to see across the NHS. I mean, I'm sure a pay rise wouldn't go amiss for most of us, eh? But unfortunately, we have to recognise that there are financial constraints within the situation. So that's a sort of summary about that paper. Before we move on to doing a bit of critiquing and a bit of analysing, has anybody got any questions or thoughts they'd like to share with the group about what we've just discussed? You are very nervous this morning, you lot. So I think from my perspective, like I said, the thing I like most about this paper is it's quite simple. They recognised a problem, they looked at it on a big and small scale, they found out what people were thinking about it and with a solution from the shop floor, and then they implemented it. And that's what I like about this. And the reason I like this the most is that as a maternity support worker or a midwife, if we've got any midwives in the room as well, this is something that you can achieve within your trust. As long as you follow the appropriate QI project policy within your trust, speaking to your manager, speaking to your matrons, your deputy heads, your directors of midwifery, whoever you have to go to accomplish this, if you have noticed something within your area that can be improved and you have an idea, I personally feel that long gone are the days where MSWs didn't have as much of an impact in terms of policy and how we do things within our respective trusts. You guys are you are the cornerstone of these projects. You spend more time with a lot of service users and birthing people than the rest of us do, and actually your ears are closer to the ground than most people who work in maternity. And actually your valuable insight can have game-changing results. So this is why I picked this, is that I think it's a really, really good way of looking at how what starts off as I've noticed this in practice. Wouldn't it be nice if that was better? Through to we've now got not only evidence to support it, but also we've got a plan, and a plan to sort of track how that works. So that's enough of me singing the praises of this paper for a minute. Moving on to a more critical analysis. So again, I'm aware that some of you might not have had as much engagement with types of research. So a brief overview. We tend to have two types of research when we look at evidence. You have quantitative, which is an objective way of looking at things. It relies heavily on data and numbers, and it's usually to test a hypothesis. Whereas qualitative, it's more subjective. So it focuses more on like feelings or words, and it seeks more to understand or explore a topic rather than necessarily answer a question. So anyone want to take a stab at which one we've got on our hands here? It's an easy one this time. Yeah, well done, Hannah. Absolutely. So yeah, we've got a qualitative paper on our hands here. So I think this is really good. I'm trying to think of a quantitative aspect of this would be I'm trying to think of something that would be a little bit more quantitative. It might be what percentage of birthing people receive accurate, safe sleeping advice in South West London. And so what you would look at is you would look at percentages. You would look at things like confidence intervals, which tools that are used to judge how strong the evidence you're using is. And you would look at things like p-values as well, which give you a number that basically tells you what you're looking at. It looks pretty solid. It's what we call statistically significant. Whereas this, it's not looking to answer necessarily a hypothesis. It's looking for people's opinions, and it's looking for people's subjective experiences within that field. So yeah, qualitative it is. Yeah, so we've got qualitative. So I'm going to take a moment to have a little look at the study design. Guy, I will say I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, so get your fingers over that raise your hand button, because I'm going to be asking for some input here. So we spoke a bit earlier about the online survey, and they had 58 participants, which is a 40% return rate. And like I said earlier, that is brilliant. That's a really strong return rate for any form of research. A lot of people, like I said, there's a big attrition rate within, use your big words, Rob. There's a lot of attrition rate within research, and people tend to drop off quite significantly. So 40% is really, really good. Looking at the study design itself, so the paper specifies that it's sent the survey out to staff who were involved with discussions surrounding safer infant sleep. Now, the only group of individuals that it mentions, I'm very sorry if you can hear that drilling noise, I'm not sure where it's coming from. The only group of individuals that it mentions within the paper, however, is midwives. So ask a really obvious question: are midwives the only people telling birthing people and partners and family members how to safely look after their child in terms of safer infant sleep? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So what do you think? Again, I'm encouraging people to raise that hand. What do you think that does to the quality of data? If you're looking at a question and you go, right, I am looking in this box at what people are experiencing, but I'm only going to look at half of it. So I'm only going to look at this individual group of people. I'm not going to look at anyone else. So Stevie, I can see that you can say that you're saying that MSWs deliver it more than midwives. I probably agree with you, at least at the same level. Hannah, do you want to chime in with this? If I have not, there we go. You should be able to talk, but I think you might be muted. Oh, I can see it. Yeah, a bias is created. Perfect. Absolutely. So you actually have a population bias within that. So what you're looking at is you're answering your question and you're getting the result that you want, but what you're actually doing is you're only focusing on a single area, on a single group of people, whereas there is an entire other group of people providing the same level of advice, and basically are changing the results, even though you're still getting the results that you probably would have done if you'd have done it to everybody. There is still valuable insight that is being ignored essentially there. I can see, Hannah, that you just said that your mic is working, so don't worry. If you do put your hand up, I'll just jump back straight to the chat to expect your response, but thank you very much. So the first thing we need to look at is population, and as I said, we've obviously missed a massively significant group of individuals who provide a variety of different public health initiatives within maternity care, but specifically they're not, they are being able to support with safer infant sleeping discussions. So that's great, and you can see why I included it now. Moving on, they ensured that anonymity was maintained for the participants. Anyone want to take a stab at why that might be important? So I'll give you a clue. If I don't, answering honestly, that's brilliant, Pauline. Fantastic. So Pauline's just put that it will encourage them to answer honestly. I think I can see Hannah's hand up again, or is that from before? Increases the likelihood of engagement. Perfect. Absolutely. If you know that you are able to openly discuss your concerns, you're more likely to be open and honest. And the thing is, so what does that do to the data? What does that do to the information that I'm going to retrieve? Hannah? I can see Ruth said it encourages people to take part. And yeah, increases the validity. Fantastic, Pauline. There's some good terminology being floated around today. I love it. Yeah, increases the validity, make it more accurate. Absolutely. Fantastic. The other thing that it can do as well is that if you're asking people about their demographics and their about the participants, It can also sometimes change. It might be that there's an unconscious bias within the researcher, and so they might they might apply different areas to different midwives. So if you know that, I'm trying to think, if you know that a midwife is slightly older, you might then judge to say, oh, well, I personally believe outside of this research that, say, older midwives might use older advice that was given out in the 90s still, for example. So it confirms that researcher bias is reduced as best as possible. It keeps the person doing the investigating objective and make sure that they can't twist the results to something. They might not even realize they're doing it, but it is a very common thing to have unconscious bias come through from researchers. And so it's really, really important to make sure that that's maintained. They used the use of open questions within their survey. So again, so what that's referring to, that instead of saying, did you do X, Y, and Z, yes or no, it's giving people the opportunity to open up and explore a little bit. Why do you think that might be beneficial in terms of qualitative research? So if we're looking at people's experiences or their beliefs or their views, why do you think the opportunity to be able to provide a longer and more open answer might be beneficial in terms of the data? And I'm going to say that phrase a lot over the course of the next few slides. Wider collection, absolutely, absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. You're giving people that space to open up. People may share something that the researchers haven't even considered part of their research, and it might uncover a common issue between participants. Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you, Hannah. Well done. That's absolutely brilliant. So you're not restricting the responses, and actually, another way to look at that is if I am asking a question about somebody's views. So I'm going to pick on Gillian because she's the only one on the camera for the time being. If I'm interviewing Gillian and I say, I'm looking at safer infant sleeping discussions, I think that teenagers, again, that unconscious bias or what I've read in the literature review, I know that teenagers are more likely to have a sudden infant death. So I'm going to ask Gillian, there's two questions I can ask her. The first one is, Gillian, do you think that teenagers are going to, have you had more teenagers engage with sudden safer infant sleep discussions? Or if I ask the question, are there any groups that you have had issue engaging with safer infant sleeping discussions? It's a non-directed question. It's not closed. If I specifically ask her about teenagers and go yes or no, she's answering my question for me, but in the way I want her to do it. And that goes against the purpose of qualitative research. You're exploring this fully. And like Hannah said, the idea is to open it up and get as much out of it as you can and really uncover those, turn over every stone. So we had a participant, moving on, we had a participant information sheet as well for this study. So what that did is it was for anybody who signed up, there was a sheet of information detailing the study, the people involved, the purpose of the study, the design of it, and giving people the option to drop out whenever they like, ensuring anonymity, and basically it's almost like the Riot Act for that particular study. So it gives them all the information involved. Again, this is a really, really important part of research, making sure that your participants have an accurate picture of what they are signing up for, because it reduces that level of bias. So again, bias is going to be a huge word over these webinars, and it's essentially you are trying to make it so that people like me and in this webinar can't come along and go, hang on a minute, I see what you did there. That's not on. You're trying to get this to a certain point. You are trying to maintain objectivity throughout this process. Yeah, and then finally, this study design, it was an online survey, and it was, so one thing I didn't touch on earlier, just quickly, the online survey, if you look at the paper itself, it doesn't, although it stipulates elements of the survey, it doesn't give you an actual copy of it, or doesn't stipulate in deep detail what the actual questions were. Seems like an obvious question. What do you think that does as a reader of this research? How do you think that makes me feel about this paper? Do you think that gives me more confidence in it, or does that make me think, what are you hiding? I'm keeping my eye on that chat box. The latter. Perfect. Yeah, it's not what you're hiding is a bit of an exaggeration, but what it does do is that it increases the ambiguity of your study. And one of the things that you will see in really strong study design is that they lay everything out as bare bones as possible. Now, this is going to be a bit of a niche question, but I will ask it. Do you think that researchers and authors of papers and things like that have total control over how much information they are allowed to put into print? Do you think they're in control of that? So if I've written a paper, no, they don't. So it needs to be peer reviewed, absolutely. But the other thing is, brilliant, Safia, no. So actually, the person who controls how much they're allowed to put into print is the editors. So I've got a paper that's it looks like it's going to be printed in June, which I'm really excited about. It's about the Journal Club. But as the thing is, if we all wrote as much as we wanted to in a paper, you'll end up with a journal about that thick every month. So actually, it's really, really important to recognize that, was this a tactical move to not include it because they didn't have the word count? Or is it because, again, it might not have been an active thought, but it might have been something that in qualitative research, you might not be as interested in those questions. Personally, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit, and be like, actually, I know what the word count is for a lot of these research papers. It's normally anywhere between 15 to 200 to 2,500 words. And actually, that sounds like a lot of words, but when you've got to write a literature review and talk about what you found in your survey and then talk about what you're going to do about it, suddenly that's looking a lot smaller than it should be. So it might be that they just didn't have the word count and they didn't have the opportunity to include it. And the last thing about the study design is that this was distributed by social media and group WhatsApps within the staffing groups. Anybody got anything to say about that? Do you think that's a good way to strap that forward? Yep, so just I can see Hannah has just made a very good point there, that it is the peer reviewer's job to notice these type of things, and putting the survey into the paper is going to take up valuable space and not allow the researchers to drive their main points forward. Exactly. So like I said, on balance, I think they probably did tactically the best thing. And I can see that Pauline and Amanda have come back and said that they don't think that distributing this via social media or WhatsApp was a good idea. Oh, I can see Gillian's got a hand up first. Hang on, I'll see if I can unmute you. Give me a sec. Oh, no. There we go. Gillian, do you want to chime in on this one?
So not everybody may be in the WhatsApp group, and some people like myself don't do social media.
Perfect. Knockout. That's exactly the point I was going to make. Yeah. So, Hannah, did you have something else that you wanted to chime in with there? I'll wait for Hannah to type a response in the chat. But yeah, so Gillian, you've absolutely not hit the nail on the head there. The distributing via social media and WhatsApp relies heavily on people's ability to utilize technology for the purposes of work. I'm going to hold my hands up on this one. Once I'm out of work, I'm probably not going to be looking at those Facebook groups as much as I should do. But that's because I value my space, and I don't think it's an appropriate channel of important information. If you need something to get something to me, send it in an email. That's the official way of doing things. I can see Hannah's just put, I tend to question things that are shared on social media, whereas if it came through an official channel such as Trust Email, would be more inclined to take it seriously. There's a parrot in here somewhere. That's absolutely fantastic. So I think you've both hit the nail on the head there, like I said. So you've got, I would take issue with the distribution method. And I would also, something that's come up a lot, especially as I've been doing research recently, is actually, and implementing stuff on the shop floor in terms of training. There are different generational abilities in terms of technology. I'm saying that as appropriately as I can. So for my generation, we grew up with the internet, whereas say for my mum and dad, my mum still refers to closing a window on a computer as kissing it goodbye because it's an X. Digital natives, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Gillian, that's great. So yeah, so that we have different groups of people who are more au fait or not as au fait with technology. So actually, that's what we could class as what we call a non-response bias. So what you are essentially doing there is you could be getting a certain group of individuals, probably in this case by age bracket, or even it might be something like digital poverty. Not everyone in this country, I think we all think everyone's got a smartphone with the ability to go on the internet or a laptop or something. That digital poverty is a lot bigger than we actually think it is. So actually what you're doing is you're bracketing your response to people of a, say, higher socioeconomic status who can afford a smartphone or a laptop, but also to a group of individuals that might be more au fait with technology. So naturally, that's going to encourage a younger audience. So you might have people who of a younger group within this setting, but actually some of the, say, older midwives might be doing something slightly different, and you're missing a big part of this picture. So I think there is an argument to be made there that actually, for the sake of a small study done within the trust, is to try and get that 40% return that they got. Was the use of social media and WhatsApp ideal? Probably not, but do we also have to recognize that in the 21st century, that is how people communicate, even whether the argument is that they should or they shouldn't? We all have just recognized that within our trusts, there are social media groups, there are WhatsApp groups, and yes, there are trust emails as well. But if everybody's using it, whether they should or they shouldn't, they've actually utilized an existing communication network to get their response rate up to 40%. So again, I'd probably make the argument that they've done, whether you argue the morals or the ethics of it, they've actually done something. They've got 40%. They've achieved a really good goal there. So I think there is an argument that they've probably done a good thing, personally. Everyone happy? Anything to chime in with there before we move on? Okay. Everybody still with me? Nobody falling asleep? Nobody rocking backwards and forwards? Wonderful. Right, let's go to, oh, there we go. So we're going to have a little look at the, Hannah's just said, in terms of getting responses, I agree with that. I thought you were talking about the sharing of the actual findings. So again, I would make the argument that sometimes you have to play within the league that you're in. If people are using WhatsApp and Facebook to communicate, as not ideal as that is, and it happens to me all the time, someone will say, oh, that piece of information or that update or something was posted on the Facebook group, and I'm like, I haven't looked at the Facebook group in 6 months. And that's not because I'm not engaging, but it's Facebook, isn't it? It's a bit old school now. But also, I just don't get time. Anyway, no, I'm glad we've had a little bit of chat about that. So location and why it's important. So what you can see here are the 4 elements that were highlighted within the study and within the literature review about risk factors in terms of sudden infant death syndrome. And then what we've done here is we've applied those risk factors to London. And this was how I spent my Sunday yesterday, because I'm that much of a dork. And these are the most up-to-date figures I could get in terms of how, I've got hair on my nose, of how it's applied to that region. So the first thing we're going to look at is obviously ethnicity. So we know that BME ethnicities have a higher rate. There was a cultural factor was highlighted within this survey itself, and in the literature review about having different practices when it comes to safer sleeping. So in terms of ethnicity, in London, 46% of the population are black or a minority ethnicity. The UK average is 14%, according to the Trust for London from 2024. And tied in with that, the population not born in the UK in London is 41%, whereas the UK average is 13%. What do we think that's going to do to our data? Anyone want to be brave and put those hands up? So I can see that Hannah said that it will skew it, and Gillian said it's going to skew it as well. Okay. Does anyone fancy being brave and chiming in with anything else, or care to elaborate on that? So Gillian, you want to give us a bit, want to go further on that, what you've said?
I think if it was repeated in a different area of the UK, the outcome would be very, very different.
Perfect. Okay.
So here in Torbay, we're on a peninsula,
Yeah.
so and that actually plays a massive factor, and our results would be very, very different from those purely because of where we are in the UK.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that that's a really important point. So, can you, by any chance, do you know what what that's referring to in terms of research?
Um,
There's a term for, like, if you took it elsewhere, would it work, or would you get the same result?
It wouldn't be the same result, but I don't know what the term is.
So the term is the external validity.
Okay.
So this is a really, really important point when we look at any form of research, is the question, answering the question. I have found that in one hospital in London, they have their results are X. So not everybody's giving the same advice out. The language barriers are quite a big thing. Everyone's exhausted, so I'm throwing loads of information at them. And visual aids would be helpful. If we take that to Torbay, where Gillian is, or we take that to Bristol, where my lovely support colleagues Heather and Jake reside, or we bring it to Birmingham, or we take it all the way to Inverness, or, you know, are we going to get those same results? Do we have those same populations? Those statistics suggest not. And actually, oh, Hannah's chimed in there. To be honest, as long as the researchers took this into account and thought about any trends they might find between ethnicities and safety guidance received, they should be able to create guidance which can be applied elsewhere, and in some ways have access to lots of demographics could be an advantage. So that's what I was about to come on to. So actually, you are right in the sense of we have different demographics across the country, and that's absolutely true. However, if you're looking to examine those ethnicities, and again, if you recognize that they are at higher risk and you want people to be able to talk about the areas for improvement when caring for those individuals, could an argument be made to say, actually, I'm going to pick an area where those groups are higher because I'm going to get a stronger result, and my data is going to be stronger. Yes, it's going to be slightly skewed, but the important thing here is that they're not measuring the amount of, they're not saying how many people, you know, is there more sudden infant death in West London and why? And we're going to look at the ethnicity profile of the population. All this is trying to do is look at the engagement issues and the experiences of those midwives. So actually, this is a really strong way of getting that data, if that makes sense. You're magnifying on an area where you're going to have midwives who encounter these people a lot more. On the flip side of that, if you look at the teenager statistic that I pulled from the Office for National Statistics in 2023, actually, London had the lowest number of under 18 pregnancies at 9.5 per thousand. I think, if I've got this right, the highest was in the northeast, which has always been quite a high population for teenage pregnancies. And they have seen a significant drop in the last 10 years. But I think, if I remember rightly, it was 19 or 20, about that per thousand. So actually, it's over double what London has on average. And so you can see that the ethnicity might match that profile, but teenagers might not. And then looking at poverty, you can see that the poverty rate in London, according to the James Rowntree, that's meant to say foundation, not foundation, with a 23% UK average. Anybody got any opinions on the difference between those statistics, do we think? Like, how do you think that applies? How do you think that affects the external validity of this? I think personally, I think the poverty, yeah, so Hannah's just put not too far off. I think the teenagers thing makes it a little bit less. But the poverty, yeah, poverty looks bang on. So I actually, when I was looking at this data, most of the UK sits between 23 and 27%. So actually, London's slap bang in the middle. So that's an average. So that's probably very reflective of the country on a whole. So that means that your external validity, again, the idea of, if I take this paper exactly as it is, and I throw it up to Torbay, I throw it to Birmingham, we do it in Cardiff, are we going to find similar things? Are we going to find these similar areas? And so actually, yeah, we probably see the same thing there. The teenagers, again, we might find that a little bit different. If we did take it up to Middlesbrough or Stockton or somewhere around there, you might find that their teenage pregnancy information that we get from them would be different. But that's okay. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. You're looking at these different areas. Another point, to just as a generalization in terms of this topic, these 4 risk factors that I've associated here, do we think these are linked? So do you think that certain ethnicities and so if you a certain ethnicity is more likely to have an impoverished lifestyle, do you think teenagers, especially teenage pregnancies, are more likely to have a higher level of poverty? Very true, a very, very valid point there. So Hannah's just made a point that poverty moves with inflation. So actually, again, that is a cracking bit of critical analysis. Actually, if we were writing this as a paper, one of the great things about looking at papers like this is the whole point of us getting together with this is to poke holes. And that sounds awful because somebody's worked really hard on this paper and this bit of research. And as I said, I think this is great. But one of the great things about evidence is our job is to poke holes, try and find a problem with it. And actually, that's how we improve the strength of the research, because we might finding those problems and then balancing it on whether it was good, overall. That's basically all we're doing in this process. And this is something that I really enjoy, which is why you're all here, because hopefully you do too. So yeah, we can see Pauline said possibly. Gillian's put that teenagers and poverty might be linked, and Heidi down in Torbay said they are likely to be linked. Absolutely. So in terms of those safer infant sleeping discussions, identifying these areas as individual risk factors is important, but recognizing the correlation between them means that you are going to be able to tackle this on a broader scale and having a bit more context in terms of societal situations. So let's have a look. So these questions are sort of half stolen, half tweaked from what we call a CASP tool. So a CASP tool, which I'm sure we can find a link for in the chat, are toolkits from a website called CASP, and they are a standard template for when you are looking at a piece of research to say, right, is this any good? Is it going to tell us something new? Is the data reliable? Did they, like I said before, did they ask Gillian, do you think that teenagers definitely have more? Or did they say, Gillian, what's your experience? Tell me everything. And they gave that opportunity so there's no bias there, or minimal bias, because to say that there's no bias in the paper completely is kind of difficult. So the first thing I'm going to ask, what did the study aim to do? So the study aimed to look at midwives' experiences of safer infant sleeping discussions and draw themes from it. Hands, we'll do show of hands. Who thinks they achieved that goal? All we have to do is raise your hands on their teams. So we've got one in Hannah, Amanda. Got a couple of thumbs up as well. Oh, we're getting some more now. Hey, you are all there. Good to know. Okay, so yeah, I personally think yes. I think they've achieved that goal. The goal they set out to look at what midwives were experiencing when they were having these conversations, and they were able to thematically feedback. So that's great. What does this study do well? Anybody brave enough to? Oh, I can see a couple of hands are still up. Are those questions, or are you still holding your Kelly? Is your hand up just from the previous question? Oh no, it's gone back down again. Okay. So what does this study do well? Can anybody want to be brave? Either pop it in the chat, pop your hands up. I am just aware of time, but I don't want to rush either. So I think this study does a lot well. I think it keeps it simple. I think it sticks true to its aims. It's not too big for its boots. I think it had a simple goal and it achieved that. They identified a problem area and worked to find a solution, Hannah. That is brilliant. You're getting a gold star today with all the input you're doing. Love it. Yeah, so I think the simplicity in the design, and I think that works really well. Are there any major issues with this study? As in like deal breakers? No, like you've lost me. You've jumped the shark. I cannot abide. Anyone want show of hands? Any big one? Oh, Gillian, I can see you've got your hand up. Do you want to?
Would it be beneficial to run it up and down the country? rather than just in the southeast?
So we'll get to that in a minute.
Oh,
We'll get
right,
to that in a
okay.
minute. That is a really good one. But very quick show of hands. Anybody think that this is an absolute disaster and has got no worth in it whatsoever? No, I agree. I don't think there are any deal-breaking issues with this one. Any minor problems that we highlighted? You can pop your hands up if you think there are. I think there are a couple that we've spoken about. Just being in one location, yeah, like both can see, both Pauline said that. Gillian, have you got another point on that one, or was that the same point you were going to make? Okay. So yeah, I think that there is that. I would have liked to have seen the survey itself, like I said before. Does it provide any new or valuable information? Show of hands if you think yes, and it doesn't have to be on a big scale. It can be on just more local. Samantha Edmonds, yes. Pauline Parks, yes. Lovely. How was poverty measured? That's a good, like we said before, great critique there. But I agree with Sam and I agree with Pauline on this one. I think it does provide new and valuable information. Is it going to change the landscape on a national capacity? Probably not too much. However, that's at this stage. Like I said, if you follow that process through and actually they use that information, implement something locally, have some success and are able to report that success with more quantitative data, because that's what most of the things that we run on in this in healthcare runs on. We need numbers. We need that solid data to be able to say, right, it was this and now it's this, and we can see that number has gone down. So yeah, I think it does on a local capacity and even on a national one if they followed this through, like I said, and we're able to implement things like the risk assessment tool on Badgernet, could work. And then what would be your next steps? We spoke about this a little bit more. I think what would be really helpful would be looking at different areas with different demographics. I think that would be a very interesting way of looking at it. And then, so, like I just said, I sort of put the cat out of the bag there a little bit. I would like to know how. So if you think about the process they've done, so they've had a look at what the problem was, they've done a literature review, they've done their survey, and they've said what they're going to do next. What would your next steps be? If you, in terms of research, what's the next question you might ask? So policies to be shared with staff to implement new materials, possible training, surveys of staff further down the line to see what people have taken from the training, and then finally repeat study. Perfect. Absolutely brilliant, Hannah. Absolutely brilliant. So yeah, the key thing for me here is looking at the interventions they put in place. So you've made a plan. My next bit I'm going to check in with you will be after you've implemented that plan and hopefully done some more surveys, or hopefully had a look at maybe the data for the region about sudden infant death, see if it goes down in your locality over the course of however long, and actually see if you start to implement that. So you have quantitative and qualitative. And if you put those two together and you can link them properly, that's a double-edged sword, because you've got both sections there. So if anybody says, oh, yeah, but how do they feel about this? You go, well, they feel really good about it because they told me. And they might go, yeah, but what's that done to the actual data? You go, well, actually, I've got that as well for you. So covering all bases. Conclusions. So it's qualitative research. I think the design was very efficient. A bit more information about the survey would have been helpful, or a bit about how they measured policy, like Hannah said. Population could have been a bit broader in terms of the teenagers, but I think en masse, I'm quite happy with this. I think it's a very strong population within the study, especially in terms of the sudden infant death risk factors. And obviously, those are the areas that we want to highlight. A good representation, like I said, new locations and further study of their QI project following this would be brilliant. And I think the key thing, like I said for you, I wanted to showcase this on our first go as a key example of what you can do as an individual and the difference you can make with just going, I've worked here for however many years. This has never changed. I think this would be a good idea. Go and do it. Go and do it. Why not? What's the worst thing that could happen? Either somebody says no, or they go, yeah, go on then. And actually, it turns out you might have been wrong. And what have you lost? But actually, if you find something that works and improves outcomes, you've got a paper on your hands. You've just created something absolutely out of thin air that you've just improved people's experiences of maternity care. Amazing. We'll be announcing the next one very shortly, hopefully in the next few weeks. So keep your eyes peeled. The next one will be in June. Really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'm so appreciative. It's really nice to see so many people who are engaging with stuff like this. And obviously, the more we engage, the more we can do it.